Hello, BookTube. This is Aaron from Aaron Read a Book or Aaron Read a Book. I was just watching Kelly from Books I'm Not Reading's video that was kind of a response to Katie's 70 must-read Victorian books. And I thought that's a good idea. That's a good idea for a video. And then I was like, why don't I have any good ideas for videos? And then I had a good idea, and I thought, I'll steal Kelly's idea. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to go through the 24 must-read books that I've read out of Katie's list of 70. And obviously, now that this list exists, we can try and complete it. We can see who can complete it. Let's start from the start. The first one I've read was The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Brontë, the lesser known Brontë in a way, and I think it's a great shame because I love this book and I think it's as good as the major novels of her sisters, but I can never in my head decide which of the three is my favourite because it's always it's going to be the most recent one I read, so I need to reread them all back to back and then make a final decision. But yeah, love The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. Anne has better taste in men than her sisters, I would say that. So if you are kind of sick of red flag people getting the woman all the time, this one's a bit better. It's got a bit better taste. Next up, no surprise, I've also read Jane Eyre. I first read Jane Eyre when I was a teenager, and for years I thought I'd properly read Jane Eyre, and then I realised it was a Reader's Digest version of it, which is like, I don't know, I think you get these everywhere, but they're like, it's not the full novel, it was reduced. And I reread it like 2 years ago or a year ago or something, and I was just sort of blown away about how good Jane Eyre is. It's perfectly structured into 5 parts, basically. So you never get bored. The pacing and structure is brilliant in this book, which is a weird thing to praise, but it's so noticeable in Jane Eyre. And maybe I noticed it more because I'd read the Reader's Digest version previously, so I was probably thinking about what they might have taken out to make it shorter, and I wouldn't take anything out of this book. It's brilliant. Next up, I think probably the first Victorian book I ever read. I can't remember exactly, but I don't think I read anything at school, but I do have always been a Kate Bush fan, so the song Wuthering Heights I always loved, which is probably what drew me towards the book. And I think the song is the perfect song about a book, because the song, maybe because I'd heard the song first, they're kind of intertwined in my brain. I can't separate them. The atmosphere of the book is the atmosphere of the song, so I can't really separate them. But obviously, I think I've read this 3 times. I love it. It's a great book. I can see why people don't like it if you don't like characters that aren't very nice. But I don't generally like characters that aren't very nice, but I love them in this case. Next up, we've got a couple of Wilkie Collins. We've got The Woman in White, which I've got like a suntan on there, which is, I think, maybe it's this one, or maybe it's The Moonstone that's regarded as the first detective novel. I think probably it's this one. Yeah, one of the earlier works of detective fiction. I can't really remember a lot about The Woman in White, and that's going to be an annoying theme to this video in a way, I think, because I didn't feel genuine to go in like I would normally do when I'm talking about books I read a long time ago. I would kind of refresh my mind a bit, but it doesn't feel right when you're doing a list like this where you're sort of remembering them off the cuff a bit. But I don't really remember this one, but I remember enjoying it. But I didn't enjoy it as much as The Moonstone, which was very shiny, which I remember really enjoying. And I do remember this is about a gem that goes missing, and it's a mystery, a yellow diamond. But yeah, again, read it a long time ago, really enjoyed it. I've got a friend who looks exactly like Wilkie Collins as well, so it always freaks me out a bit whenever I see pictures of him, because it looks like my friend has time travelled. But yeah, I do recommend both of them, but I need to refresh my memory on them as well. Maybe I'll read, what was the other one in there? Man and Wife. I haven't read that one, or Armadale, so I need to. I'll read some more Wilkie Collins at some point. Just realised I missed one as well because I don't have a copy of it. But another book I've read on the list is Erewhon by Samuel Butler, and I'm guessing that this is probably one of the ones on Kate's list that is least read. And the reason I read it was because when I was 23 or 24-ish, the same age as Samuel Butler, I also emigrated to New Zealand from London. So it felt, and he went to Canterbury, which is where I went to as well, and he lived, he worked in a place near Littleton, which is a place I lived near Littleton as well. And so it just felt, it felt like kismet to read this book that's kind of based on his experience of emigrating to New Zealand when he's 20 odd, because everyone is nowhere backwards, and nowhere is another meaning, or is the meaning of the word utopia. So it's about a utopia, and again, don't really remember it much. I remember it being a tough read, and yeah, I don't think that, I can't remember there's much of a story to it, but it just reminds me of being 23 and reading books that I couldn't really understand. But in New Zealand, which is a lovely place, and it is a utopia. Next up we have A Study in Scarlet, Sherlock Holmes, the first Sherlock Holmes book. Another one that I've actually reread quite recently, but it made my opinion of it go down because I reread it like last year, I think, when lots of people were doing a Sherlock Holmes read along or something. It made me worry because I don't think it's anywhere near as good as the other Sherlock Holmes books. I think I agree with what Katie said in her video, that the short stories are the best, and of the novels this is the worst one, I think. So it's not a very good introduction to Sherlock Holmes, I don't think. And I think, although it was still entertaining to read, the weird bit in the middle where it goes off into Utah or somewhere just is not structurally very good, and might put people off reading the rest of Sherlock Holmes, which I think is pretty much from that everything onwards is really good. Maybe some of the end stuff is not so great as well, but there's all the short stories. So I would always say go with the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes first. But yeah, I do love Sherlock Holmes, so I do recommend it highly. Even if you are a completionist and want to start from the beginning, still read it. What's next? We've got weirdly a Penguin modern classic, Heart of Darkness. You don't associate Penguin modern classics with the Victorian age, but I double checked, and this was originally written in 1899. So it's weird that maybe, I think Penguin has a cut-off point of 1900, and this wasn't published in. Maybe it wasn't published in England. Well, actually, I think he wrote this in English. Maybe it wasn't published in Penguin till the 1900s. But yeah, I think I read this because I like Apocalypse Now and Colonel Kurtz and the horror. But I don't remember liking it very much. But it's very short. I think it's impressive. I remember being impressed by how good he is with language, considering that English is not his first language and he wrote this in English. But yeah, it's about a mad person on the river, isn't it? Colonel Kurtz, although I think he's just called Kurtz in this. But yeah, I don't think I liked it very much. I would happily give Conrad another go because I read it when I was like 19 or something. Next up, what have we got? We've got Charles Dickens, who I have had my issues with. This is where you all hit unsubscribe. I've had my issues with, but I did quite enjoy this novel, which is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. I think I gave it 3 stars. I read this a few years ago, and it was my latest and most successful attempt at Charles Dickens. I have to say I do like A Christmas Carol. I read that and enjoyed that. Bleak House, not so much. I DNF'd that after 200 pages, which is still the introduction for Charles Dickens. They're still introducing characters. And I think something Katie said on one of the reading sprints this week struck me, is that Dickens uses a lot of long run-on sentences, and maybe that's what's tripping me, because I find Dickens, even though he was like this massive popular writer, the kind of massive name of his age, I find him more difficult to read than any other Victorian writer, including George Eliot. I find it, I don't know why, but I find him on the page hard to read and hard to get a grasp of. But I think it's because his characters also have weird language, and also I don't really like his characters. I don't like the extreme characterization. I much prefer very nuanced, multi-layered characters, and I think Dickens is more like a kind of like fantasy in a way, but I've never really got on with him. But to be honest, I haven't read a lot of him. I've DNF'd Bleak House, I've DNF'd the Pickwick Papers, and I read Hard Times at school and hated it, but that's not really a fair judgment. But I will keep trying. Great Expectations I thought was pretty decent, and it had a quite fun atmosphere to it. Next up, we've got perhaps the opposite of Dickens, George Eliot, which is very detailed realism and very layered characterization. For example, Dorothea Brooke is a character that I can see why people don't get on with her necessarily, but I think like she annoys me. Dorothea Brooke annoys me because I think, why are you making these decisions? Why are you doing that? And I think that can annoy people. But I will defend this novel because Kelly and Katie are both not really big fans of George Eliot. This is the best book of the 24 books I've read. Out of all the Victorian books on the 70 books you must read, Middlemarch is the best. And it did take me, it's the first George Eliot I read, and I've only read one more since, but I'm about to start another one today. But it did take me about 3 or 4 attempts to start it. I read the first 20 pages 3 or 4 times over the years, until one day I just sat down and said, I'm going to read it. I'm going to read all of it. And then I found, once I got into the flow of it, I didn't find it difficult. Once I get into the flow, once I get into the Eliot style, I can read perfectly well. And I found Silas Marner, which I read after, which is obviously a much shorter book, I found it even harder to start. But once that got into the flow, I loved it as well. So I can see why people don't like George Eliot, but I think she's amazing, and it's such an incredibly multi-layered book that you could easily dig into it over and over again. And I rewatched. I watched the miniseries of it recently, and it really made me want to reread it, which I'm not going to do because I need to read the rest of her books first. Next up is another author that's one of my favourite Victorian authors, and who I would never have read without Victober, because the first book I read by her, which isn't on this list, Gothic Tales, was one of the Victober reads, and I didn't really like Gothic Tales. I thought it was I thought my edition had lots of spelling mistakes and editorial mistakes in, which I think put me off slightly, but yeah, I didn't see anything special about it, and then I read some more of her books, and I love her, and that is of course Elizabeth Gaskell. Cranford is my third favourite Gaskell, but I think it really appeals to my love of what I call old lady books that are even written by old ladies or are for old ladies or about old ladies, and Cranford is kind of the mother lode of all the old lady books, or the originator of the old lady book, because it's about sort of these old ladies in a little village, and it's very gossipy and wonderful in that way. And there's obviously reflections of this in Katie's Miss Montgomery Hurst book, which I loved. So, but yeah, it's, if you like, it also came as a big shock when I read this one, actually, because I read it after Gothic Tales and North and South, and it's such a shift in style. Like every book I was reading, every book I was reading by her, okay, and this is completely different. It's mad, but yeah, I love Elizabeth Gaskell. And then of course we have North and South, another shiny cover, but this is potentially my favourite of hers. I find it very hard to separate this and the third book. I do think this has the greatest last page in all of literature, and I love that it's about the sort of industrial Midlands, and the factories, and I love in the mini-series when you see all the cotton in the air and it's like snow. It's a great book. I always, whenever I talk about it, I always say it, talk about the Goodreads review that says this is like a socialist Pride and Prejudice, and it is. It's great. And then of course there's Wives and Daughters, which again Kelly's not a big fan of. She was really slagging it off in her video, but then I get my revenge by slagging off Dickens, so it's all good. But yeah, I read this last year and I loved it. It's a bit frustrating, obviously, that it's not finished, but I think of all of Elizabeth Gaskell's books that I've read, this is the most me book, because I think it's more Trollope and more Tolstoy-ish, and I love Squire Hamley, as Katie shouted out. She thinks it's one of the greatest characters in literature, and I agree. I love him. Yeah, it's just a great book. It is obviously a shame that the ending's not there, but I would encourage everyone to read it who hasn't, but I'm guessing many of you have. Next up, we're into the second part of Katie's video. There's a bunch of Hardy in there, and I have only read Jude the Obscure by Hardy, but I have got Far From the Maddening Crowd. I haven't read it yet, so I've skipped past all the Hardy, and found myself with Jerome K. Jerome, and I enjoyed this book when I read it. It was quite a few years ago. I read this because I love Connie Willis's book To Say Nothing of the Dog, which is like a science fiction reply to 3 Men in a Boat, where these time travellers go back in time to the time of the book, and the three men in the boat are real, and they have to go on a boat trip, and it's just a brilliant science fiction novel that won the Hugo and the Nebula Award, and it's a great Victorian romantic romp, that book. So if you like Victorian books and are not sure about sci-fi, give that a go. But yeah, I read it because I was a big fan of that book, and I did enjoy it, and I feel like I want to revisit it, because when I did a video a few months ago where I looked up all my authors' favourite authors and was sort of tracing a line back through time, everything was going through Jerome K. Jerome. Like, a lot of my favourite authors specifically shouted out Jerome K. Jerome, and then they all eventually lead back to Jane Austen as well. But yeah, it's a funny Victorian book. And Diary of a Nobody, that also reminds me a bit of this, which is another funny Victorian book. Next up, Carmilla, which J. Sheridan Le Fanu. Yeah, I read this again recently, maybe last year, and I'd never read Le Fanu at all, and I hadn't read Dracula, which I read immediately after Carmilla. But I really enjoyed Carmilla. I thought it was an interesting story. I don't think Le Fanu is as good a writer on the page sort of thing as Bram Stoker. I think Bram Stoker is a really good writer on a sentence level, but I think Carmilla is a tighter story and very weird themes and things for you wouldn't expect it in the Victorian times to. I don't want to go into too much detail, but there are elements of it that are unusually modern. Next up, we've got Hester, the group read this year. I have read it because I finished it today, because I've been slightly naughty and finished it a couple of days early. But yeah, I enjoyed Hester. I also read the two first books in the Chronicles of Carlingford last month, and I enjoyed those as well. I think I probably enjoyed the atmosphere and vibe of the Carlingford books more so than Hester, which is a very unusual book with interesting themes, but I didn't quite like it quite as much. I felt it dragged a little bit in the middle, but I'm not going to go into any details. But I did really enjoy it. So another good group read pick, and there's more group reads coming up. Next, we've got Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. I didn't really love Treasure Island that much. I thought it was alright. I thought it was quite interesting, but I had too much high expectations for it. It is a fun kind of romp, the good sort of child's story. Long John Silver's obviously a great character as well. I found it quite difficult to read. And then we've also got The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which I read last year, I believe. I like this quite a lot more than Treasure Island, and I found it one of those books where you think you know the story, but it was quite different to what I expected. But yeah, I enjoyed that much more. Both were very short, so you can easily give them a go if you want. And then next up we have Dracula, which I mentioned before, by Bram Stoker. I am gonna maybe upset some people and say I think Dracula's rubbish. I didn't like it at all. Like I said, I think Bram Stoker's on the page a better writer than Le Fanu, but he's unbelievably boring bits in the middle, very repetitive, very misogynist, characters just saying the same thing over and over again, and then not doing it. And I will say, obviously the characters are brilliant. Renfield is one of my favourite characters that I've ever read, but and Dracula is obviously very interesting and spawned loads of stuff, but the reading experience of reading Dracula I found quite dull. not enjoyable at all. Opposite of that, next up, Vanity Fair, an absolute chunkster, but much better structure and pacing than Dracula. Although we have a kind of social Dracula in Becky Sharp, who's one of the great characters of all literature. I read this last year and I really loved it. I read it mostly because of how much of an influence it was on Trollope, or how much of an influence in general William Makepeace Thackeray is on Trollope, and I see the elements of what Trollope took from his work in this, and I think he does a great job. Again, I also find this to be quite like Tolstoy. I don't know why I think everything is like Tolstoy, but I think it was more the other way around, where Tolstoy was influenced by this. I think he specifically mentioned. But yeah, it's obviously a massive story with a very interesting female character at the heart of it. But I love all the side stories as well. It's great. And it opens in Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens, and I work right next to Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens and quite often sit and read there. So it feels very, although it's not the same as it used to be. It used to be this massive thing, and now it's just a small bit of green with a zoo, a sort of petting zoo there. But yeah, it felt interesting reading about a place where I often read. Right, we're getting close to the end now. Next on the list after Vanity Fair, there was He Knew He Was Right, which is an Anthony Trollope I haven't actually read, so I've got that one to very much look forward to, because Anthony Trollope is my favourite Victorian writer. But the one on the list that I have read is another group read, and that is The Way We Live Now, which is a strange Anthony Trollope book, because I think I've read 10 Trollope books now, I think, maybe more, and this is the most different of his other books. I think he always has interesting and unexpected ways to deal with characters, but this is an incredibly cynical book, and it's very much poking fun at a society that he thinks has gone wrong after he's come back from travelling. And I just don't generally get that cynicism from Trollope, but he is a master, so he makes it work. And again, this is such a lot of Trollope's books, especially his chunky ones, feel like such a big world with loads of little side stories and stuff that you get really interested in all the stories, and this one really has that in droves, so I can see why it's one of his more popular books. But I do hope that everyone who read it in the group read and enjoyed it will read more Trollope and see what his other books are like as well, because he has very happy, sweet books as well, and they're not all this cynical. But I do love this book, and do recommend it, but maybe not as a first Trollope. Next up, we've got The Island of Dr. Moreau. Again, quite a recent read for me, because it was the big H.G. Wells classic that I hadn't read, and I read it maybe last year, and I found it very interesting, but not quite as entertaining as other H.G. Wells books. I thought it was quite an interesting look at science going too far, which is a theme that comes up in science fiction all the time, and this is a very early way to look at it, when it's basically at the birth of science fiction still. So I found that very interesting, and you often don't get that much biological science fiction, and this is very much biological science fiction about people experimenting with the human form and stuff. But I did enjoy it. I thought the ending was brilliant. But yeah, it wasn't my favourite H.G. Wells. And next up we've got The War of the Worlds, which is one of my favourite H.G. Wells, but I read it a long time ago. I remember it specifically because I read 4 H.G. Wells books in one day, because they're all quite small, and I read them all on my computer screen, and this was like 8 years ago with like terrible monitors, so it must have been utterly tiring on my eyes. But I think a lot of people know The War of the Worlds from radio and songs and things, and terrible Tom Cruise movie adaptations. But yeah, it's a well-known story, but I remember really enjoying that one. And last book we've got is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, which I read I think when I was a teenager, and I have no real memory of. And it's the only Oscar Wilde I've read, and I often see people like Roz reading Oscar Wilde and really enjoying it, and I think, oh, I should read that too. So I do really need to revisit Wilde, because I don't have a great deal of memories about this book either, apart from the things that everyone knows about it. But yeah, I need maybe to try one of his plays or something. But that's my 24 books that I've read out of Katie's list of 70, and I've managed to make this video very long, so I apologise for that. But let me know which ones on the list that I haven't read that you think that I would like. There's a few on there that I've got already. I've got Deerbrook and The Heir of Redcliffe on Kindle, and I've got a few others in paperback. I've got The Far from the Madding Crowd on paperback, and yeah, I want to try George Gissing as well. George Gissing is one I haven't read that I think I might like. But yeah, let me know which ones you've liked that I haven't liked or haven't seen read. Yeah. Have a good one, BookTube. Bye.